Thank you to everyone for joining me tonight. As I always say when it comes to a Shabbos Shuva Drasha, albeit virtually this time, I always want to ask Rishus of Rabbi Marcus, the Rishus of Rabbi Sharbat, and Rishus Kol HaKahal, HaVirtual Kahal, HaKadosh Hazeh. And it pains me not to be able to be there with everyone together in shul, but we make do, given our circumstance. And this will certainly be, at least I hope, and I hope for all of you as well, a Shabbos Shuva Drasha that we will never forget. I remember a few years ago, someone came to me and told me that they were having a crisis of faith. And I think it would be fair to say that to a certain degree, this year, on some level for each and every one of us, has carried some message along those lines. But this is what this individual said to me. They said, Rabbi, how do you expect me to believe in a God, in someone that I can't feel, that I can't see, that I can't hear and I can't smell? Boy, have we learned that answer this year. How we have been brought to our knees as a society by something that we cannot see, by something that we cannot feel. And HaKadosh Baruch Hu has been sending us a message. You know, every year before I give a Shabbos Shuva Drasha, I always like to listen to the Drasha of Rabbi Yisachar Fran Shlita. Rabbi Fran, of course, is this tremendous orator, brilliant Rosh Hashiva. And this year I also wanted to hear what he had to say, of course, being a unique year. And Rabbi Fran started off his Drasha by saying the following, and he really surprised me. Because he said, how many of us realized that last Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur, we would be so successful in our tefillah? And I said, so successful? Huh. Considering the year we've had, we probably feel like failures when it came to Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur, our tefillahs last year. And here's what Rabbi Fran said. How many times do we say the words of Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur? Uvechein tein pachtecha Hashem Elokeinu al kol maasecha. How many times do we say the words, Hashem, please put your fear, that everyone in the world, every creation should fear you? And said Rabbi Frand, amazing how successful we were. Because this was a year that we were all in fear and are still in fear. I just took a look at the headlines from Israel. The number is still going up. A report out of Brooklyn that 3 people who were not senior citizens died in the last 3 days in Maimonides Hospital from the Orthodox community of COVID. And so we'd like to think, on some level, maybe we would like to get back to normal. I don't know, the other day I was on the elliptical, and I'm watching an ad from all the pharmaceutical companies. They got together, and they made an ad that represented all of them. And here was the message of the ad. Combating COVID-19 together. Science is how we get back to normal. My dear shul family, and I mean that sincerely, never before have I felt as close to our shul family, shul membership as a family, as I have this year. Tonight, I am going to challenge the premise of that ad. Which premise? No, surprisingly, I'm not going to challenge the premise that science is going to get us back to normal. But the premise that I will challenge is the premise that we will return to normal. On this Motzei Shabbos, on this Erev Yom Kippur, I suggest to you that we can never go back to normal. We can't afford to go back to normal. Gina Kolata wrote a book about the great influenza pandemic of 1918. And in it, she quotes an important work by Alfred Crosby. And his work was entitled America's Forgotten Pandemic. And she observes that Crosby went to the Reader's Guide to Periodical Literature from 1919 to 1921, and he counted the column inches devoted to the influenza epidemic as compared with other topics. He said there were 13 inches, citing articles on baseball, 20 inches on Bolshevism, 47 on prohibition, and 8 inches of citations referred to the flu. Then Crosby looked at the Encyclopedia Britannica. The 1918 flu got 3 sentences. One sentence was devoted to the flu, and it said that the epidemic killed 21 million people, which Crosby says was a gross understatement. But even so, 21 million people, one sentence? Does that make sense? So he finds it striking that medical scientists are amazed by what seemed to be a great silence in view of the influenza epidemic's dramatic impact, not just on mortality statistics or on the army's ability to fight, but in everyday life. They recall that citizens wore white gauze masks in public in a vain attempt to protect themselves. Listen to how familiar all this sounds. Funerals were limited to 15 minutes. Coffins were in short supply. Morticians and gravediggers could not keep up with the demand for their services. In Philadelphia, so many bodies had piled up in the morgue that the embalmers said the conditions were so offensive that they would not enter it. Public gatherings were prohibited in many cities. In some places, made it a crime to cough, sneeze, or spit in public. In Washington, D.C., even the Supreme Court adjourned. And Washington hospitals were so crowded that they stationed undertakers at their doors to remove each body as soon as the death occurred to make room for another patient. But the flu was expunged from newspapers, magazines, textbooks, and society's collective memory. And Crosby calls the 1918 flu America's forgotten pandemic. Quote, the important and almost incomprehensible fact about the Spanish flu is that it killed millions upon millions of people in a year or less. Nothing else, no infection, no war, no famine has ever killed so many in as short a period. And yet, it has never inspired awe, not in 1918 and not since. Not among the citizens of any particular land and not among the citizens of the United States. And in asking why, Crosby proposes a combination of factors that he said acting together accounted for the world's collective amnesia. For one, World War I. People were so overwhelmed. And so it was easier to forget about a tragic time. And Crosby goes on as his second explanation is very, very powerful. He says, this was a generation that had been battling the germ theory of disease. Every year they conquered another germ. They conquered the theory. They were conquering illness. But society could not accept the fact that along came the Spanish flu. And all of their efforts, all of their work was considered as if it was naught because they couldn't figure it out. They couldn't stop people from dying. And so Crosby, his implication is that for American society, it was an incredibly humbling experience, so much so that they erased it from the history books, that they wouldn't write about it in the newspapers, that they wouldn't put it in the textbooks, because it was a threat to the success of what America had become. And it was really something challenging to the arrogance of who we were. If that was true in 1918, what could be said about us in 2020? Living with the pandemic of COVID-19. And so the first lesson that I think we need to walk away from is really the impact of our own arrogance and how it hits us in our lives. You know, someone mentioned to me today, just today, how frustrated he is that we've been so careful, our shul, our community in West Orange, and yes, there was an incident recently, but including everyone have been wearing masks. We have been abiding by all the rules. We as a community have really done a tremendous job, and even collectively in our response of taking responsibility and making sure that we care about each other. Tremendous, tremendous effort. So this person was saying to me, we in the shul have figured out a way to seat 650 people, Rosh Hashanah, Yom Kippur, socially distanced all over the community. And yet, in the news, all we hear about is the fact that COVID is coming back with a vengeance. And that on some level, the Orthodox Jewish community has a responsibility for it. How frustrating that is when we're sort of being painted with a broad brush. Someone from Muncie the other day told me, they said, you know, if I lived in a cave and I came out, I peeked out of the cave, I wouldn't believe what I was seeing. Torah observant Jews, us who value life above anything else, pikuach nefesh doche kol haTorah kula, not wearing masks. He said, I'd go back into my cave. It's unfathomable. And the purpose of me raising this is not to knock on other communities. It's not to criticize other people. We have better things to do Erev Yom Kippur. But the reason is that I want to touch on something that I think on a certain level really hits at all of us, and it's about vulnerability and asking ourselves this question on this Erev Yom Kippur. On some level, how does this touch us? And that is at the core of this, at the core of everything we've been going through. And I think to myself all the time, I say, I can't imagine for the members of our community who lost family to COVID. I can't imagine for the orphans, for children who lost a parent to COVID, for the widow or the widower who lost a spouse to COVID, to walk into a supermarket and to see someone without a mask. You know, we're so concerned about taking care of the widow, taking care of the orphan. So we give them money. What do we do for their pain? How can we not wear a mask? What does it cost me to wear a mask? So what's at the core of not wearing a mask? You know what at the core of it is? Al chet shechatanu lefanecha b'nitiyas garon. The sin that we sin before you, Hashem, with the arrogance in our body language. Or maybe the arrogance in what we don't put on our body. And I'm not talking about just in general. I'm talking about what's at the core of why I decide, I'll tell you why may I wear a mask, or I'll tell you why this is all nourishkeit. I'll tell you why this mask is good, this mask isn't good. My doctor says this, your doctor says that, I read this study, I read that study. What's it all about? You know what it's all about? It's all about arrogance. It's all about my choosing that I know better. I know better than the doctors, I know better than the scientists, I know this one, I know that one. It's all about arrogance. And if I would choose one word that I think we need to think about in all different areas of our lives, is how arrogant are we? How arrogant have we become as a society? How arrogant we may even be as individuals. Yes, we proudly wear our masks. But are we arrogant in our relationships? Among our family? Do we act as if we know it all? Arrogance leads to destruction. The Gemara talks about it when it comes to the Churban of the Beis HaMikdash. So we have to ask ourselves, I believe one of the lessons from this pandemic is to ask ourselves the question, what role does arrogance play in our lives? When we look at other communities and we say, why aren't they wearing masks? Let's look at ourselves and ask that question too. We might be wearing our masks, but is there something else going on inside of us? Do we flaunt what we have? Do we impose our opinions upon others? Do we show off in our own ways? And are we not honest with ourselves about it? Azus, brazenness, nitias garon, our body language, part of our personalities, and how it impacts our lives and the lives of others who engage with us. You know, today I spoke in the shul. It was the first time we had a bar mitzvah since March, or probably February. And I spoke about Yehoshua. This was the moment in which Moshe handed over the leadership of the Jewish people to Yehoshua. And Yehoshua is called Hosea. And Rashi says, you know why Yehoshua is called Hosea? Because even though he now became the leader of the Jewish people, Yehoshua was still Hosea. Yehoshua was a humble man. He didn't become such an arrogant person. And I think we have to ask ourselves, even if we see it in others, maybe it's not in our mask, but elsewhere. Kadosh Baruch Hu wants us to carry the banner of humility. The Navi tells us, Hatznei Aleches, all Hashem wants from us is to live lives of modesty, to be humble. And as a people, we become keenly aware of the need of humility in our society, a society which has been brought to its knees by a virus which cannot be seen, heard, touched, or smelled, and the history books are not written yet. But who knows what they'll say about our arrogance. You know, this year we've learned a new vocabulary. Words which we rarely used in the past are now at the tip of our tongue. I must tell you that personally, when I finish the Shabbos HaGadol Drasha every year, within a half hour, I say to myself, okay, what am I going to do for Shabbos Shuva? And when I finish the Shabbos Shuva Drasha, I say to myself, okay, what am I going to do for Shabbos HaGadol? So preparing a Shabbos Shuva Drasha, preparing a Shabbos HaGadol Drasha, it takes months because you got to constantly be thinking. But I want to tell you, for all of you that were with me for the Shabbos HaGadol Drasha, it was an unbelievable moment. Because I gave it from my basement. Because at that time, I was someplace that many of us have been, and a word that is all too familiar to us now, quarantine. And at that moment, right after that drasha, I went upstairs and I left quarantine, and I came back to my family and my community. But quarantine, without question, had its impact. I asked my children today, I said, did I tell this story in Shabbos HaGadol? Because I didn't find it in my notes, I didn't find it in the speech, but something says to me, maybe I told it. Because quarantine has its impact. I don't know, I felt submished. Maybe it was because of COVID, who knows? But I don't even remember. So by the way, I might tell a story that I told already and you'll all be mochel me. And on the topic of mechila, this has been a crazy year. I ask everyone for mechila, for anything that I may have done to hurt anyone. But the word quarantine has its impact. It certainly had its impact on me, and the fear of quarantine, even for those who have not been in quarantine. There's a lot to it, and I want to focus on quarantine. Because if we look at the Torah, we find something very powerful to apply to our lives this Erev Yom Kippur that we can walk away with as a lesson having to do with quarantine. In the Rambam in Hilchos Shuva talks about the components of Shuva, and he says, V'chein yisnachem al she'avar. He says a person could have nechama, they could take comfort on the past. So why would he say take comfort? A person should feel bad. Oh, charata, I feel bad a little bit, but yisnachim comfort means charata is a little bit. Yisnachim comfort is you can't do anything about the past but change for the future. So I think we all have to look at ourselves in this fashion and to ask ourselves the question. The quarantine that we have experienced, and we've all experienced it on a certain level, whether it's because we had COVID or during the months of March and April, or we were quarantined from our shul, it's had an impact on us. How have we changed from our experience this year? How have we changed as an Eved Hashem, as a Jew? How have we changed as people? How have we changed as spouses? How have we changed as children? How have we changed as siblings? How have we changed as friends? What mark has COVID-19 left upon us as individuals and as a community? You know, people react to the experience of life in different ways. We see these examples in the Torah in a very real way over the last 10 days and on Yom Kippur as well. And I want to focus just on 3 individuals, beginning with Rosh Hashanah, in which we mentioned Noach in our davening, in the Zichronos, in Musaf, that Hashem remembered Noach with love. But the Gemara tells us the following, that Noach experienced 3 worlds. He experienced the world before the flood, he experienced the world during the flood, and he experienced the world after the flood. So the Gemara, the Medrash tells us, do you know what happened when Noach came out of the Teva? He looked at the world, he looked at the destruction, he looked at the desolation, and he started to cry. He said, Ribono Shel Olam, what did you do? And God's response to Noach was, what did I do? I've been telling you I was going to do this for 120 years. Now you ask me you could have prevented this. So how does Noach react when God responds to him that way? Look how the Torah refers to him. Noach was the Ish Tzaddik. Noach now becomes the Ish Ha'adama. Noach responds by planting a vineyard. Rabbi Beryl Wein, the brilliant Talmud Chacham, Rosh Yeshiva, storyteller, historian, he asks the question, he says, you know what did Noach do wrong? You need to have wine in a world. People drink wine, we make kiddush on wine. What's wrong with having wine? Why does the Torah look at Noach so negatively? Because of the fact that he planted a vine. And so Rabbi Wein, of all people, right? Wine? So Rabbi Wein explains as follows. He says that there's nothing wrong with planting a vine. But that's the case under normal circumstances. But the situation after the Mabul was not normal circumstances. It was a once-in-a-lifetime moment. And that Noach, after the destruction of the Mabul, he should have thought big. He should have asked, what do I need to do? What does the world need from me? But Noach, he just went back to normal. He just acted ordinary. He missed the message. And so the Torah calls him an Ish Ha'adama, a man of the earth. Because Noach reacted, his reaction to Hashem, when Hashem said, Noach, look, you could have saved this. He absolutely could not handle the facts and the reality. Noach was overwhelmed. So you know what he did? He exited. He lost himself in alcohol. He tried to find something that would take him away from his sadness, from his overwhelmedness. And Noah ended his life to a certain degree being a miserable failure because he had incredible opportunity and he missed it. But if we contrast that with Moshe Rabbeinu, we see that Moshe Rabbeinu's quarantine was very different. Moshe Rabbeinu standing on the mountain for 40 days and 40 nights. And Hashem says to him, go down, you don't know what's going on down there. And Moshe says, what's going on? He says, your people, Moshe, they destroyed everything I've tried to do for them. So imagine, Moshe, he could have taken the road of Noah. He could have said to Hashem, God, Timur Atoiva, I'm done. Find someone else, and I'm going to walk off. I'm going to walk off the mountain. I'm going to walk off the cliff. And I'm going to go somewhere else, find somebody else. Enough. Shoin genik, enough. But Moshe says, no. I've got to go down there, and I got to take care of this. And so he comes down from the mountain. He engages the people. He says to them, what did you do? He goes on a mission, and Moshe is fearless. He destroys the Egel. He puts the people in their place. And then he goes back up to the mountain into quarantine again. 40 days, 40 nights. And Hashem says, Moshe, forget about it. These people, Shoy, enough with them. And Moshe says, no, God, you have to forgive them. And Moshe, that man on a mission, comes down on Yom Kippur with the second set of luchos and says, folks, I fought for you. Look what happened. Hashem said, Salachti kidmarecha. Tomorrow night, that's when Moshe came down. What a difference from Noah. And the person we engage with most prominently on Yom Kippur, who spent so much time in quarantine, was the Kohen Gadol, the high priest. A man who before Yom Kippur was quarantined for 7 days, was away from his family, had to spend time all alone, waiting for that moment that he was to go into the Holy of Holies. And we could only imagine the fear, the trepidation, yet the excitement and the confidence and the humility in which the Kohen Gadol went in, and we're told that there were Kohanim Gedolim who didn't make it out alive. So every time a Kohen Gadol would walk in, yes, excitement, but trembling. And imagine they wouldn't be success if they came out and they didn't make it. They didn't attain forgiveness for the people. And what happens when the Kohen Gadol leaves the Holy of Holies? He performs the Yom Kippur service. Hashem forgives the Jewish people. The Kohen Gadol turns around. He davens to Hashem before he goes. He asks for a good year for the people. He exits the Holy of Holies, and he explodes with radiance. Mare Kohen, the face of that Kohen. And in that song, one of the things that we say is Ki Yoshev B'Seiser L'Chalos Pnei Melech. Who is that Kohen Gadol compared to? The one who was Yoshev B'Seiser, the one who sat in concealment to plead before the king, Moshe Rabbeinu. We're told that when Moshe came down from Har Sinai, of course we know they didn't recognize Moshe because his face was radiating. And so too the Kohen Gadol's face was radiating as well as he leaves the Kodesh Kodashim. The Kohen Gadol is a new man with stories to share about his successful experience, with a smile radiating from ear to ear. The Kohen doesn't simply return to normal. The Kohen begins his life in a new normal. And he tells his family, I'm not just a Kohen Gadol, I'm the Kohen Gadol who attained forgiveness for the Jewish people. The Rambam in Hilchos Shuva tells us that Shuva is when a person says, I am different, I am new, I am not the same person who committed the sin, but I'm different. So will we return to normal? I'm going to say something very, very powerful now, and I hope you will forgive me if I offend anyone. I want to say very carefully, yet forcefully, We can't return to normal. We can't afford to. Chas v'shalom that we should return to normal. We are forever changed. We are different. We recognize how special it is just to breathe. We recognize how special it is to be in the company of someone else. We recognize that our words mean so much to other people. Being positive, staying positive. You know, how many times a day do we offer encouraging or supportive comments to other people? I asked permission as to I could share this story because Ben Klibanoff came over to myself and to Andrew before Rosh Hashanah when we had that drive-by, which was really an amazing experience. And he said, I want you to know something. Someone is probably going to complain about something before Rosh Hashanah. And I just want you both to know, don't let what they say ruin your Rosh Hashanah, because everyone appreciates how hard the shul worked to make this Rosh Hashanah so special. And I just said to myself, Ben didn't have to do that. What does it cost us to say something nice to someone else? What does it cost us to be positive? And perhaps we can walk away saying to ourselves, you know, I am going to say 5 positive things a day, 2 positive things a day to someone, even though I don't have to. Somebody came over to me, I should say it came over to me on Zoom, right? Well, they called me, I'm not sure. And they said to me, Rabbi, you know, I'm going to say something now that I feel very guilty about saying. But I have to ask you, I have to tell you. And they say, I feel guilty about saying it because I know that so many people lost family to COVID. And that's why I have tremendous guilt, charat, I feel badly saying what I'm about to say. But they said with full sincerity, they said that part of them doesn't want COVID to end. I couldn't believe it. I just want COVID to end. It's been a nightmare. So I said, Rabbi, I understand. Life has become so much more simpler. We've been able to spend so much more time with our families. We recognize just how special our families and friends are to us. Our simchas have become much more modest. Our expectations of life have changed. So I responded and said, I only wish we can keep all of those and be rid of COVID, Emir Hashem. You know, I marvel how we have grown and continue to grow into this beautiful, unique community. Even over the last few years, we've made tremendous strides in our growth. And physically, we are growing, Kenai Nahara, but we're also growing spiritually. Our Talmud Torah has taken to a new level. The other day, I asked someone what the daf was, and somebody else responded. We have dozens of members, and I'm not exaggerating, dozens of members who are learning daf yomi, regularly attending shiurim. The women's based Beit Midrash over this year had flying numbers. The amount of people that attend Rabbi Sharbat's Navi Shir, the various other shiurim, Rosh Chodesh, the Parsha Shir, we've almost doubled our numbers because of Zoom. People are engaged. We're growing. But there's still room for more growth. So many minyanim. Could you imagine? We're talking about minyan in the shul. Could you imagine how many minyanim we have that are sustainable minyanim in all of these backyards for all of this time? New people coming to minyan every day who have not in the past. People never seeing themselves as minyan goers. People never seeing themselves as being individuals who would attend a class, a shir. We're entering a renewed chapter in the history of our shul. Not only one of growth physically, Baruch Hashem, but also growing spiritually. And tonight, we need to push ourselves further. And we can. Each of us needs to be makabel, needs to take upon ourselves something new, to do more than we have as a result of this year's experience. You know, look at the chesed. Look at the chesed that has been on display in this community over the course of this past year. Look at that chesed WhatsApp that Larry Ryan and Moshe Renee Glick were behind. Look at the chesed, the beautiful component. But nevertheless, and as much as this community has been proud of the chesed that we do, we are all familiar with the Mishnah. The Talmud Torah keneged kula. Chesed is beautiful, but there's nothing more beautiful than Talmud Torah. And we need to make sure that we continue to grow in that area. What about our tefillah? How long were we locked out of shul? How long did we daven alone? And many people said to me, Rabbi, I got to be honest, I was davening by myself on Pesach, and truthfully, I've never been able to experience, to look at the words, to spend time davening like I did with myself. And I think it's beautiful. But now we have to ask ourselves the question, why have I not been able to do that in shul all these years? So maybe it's a new opportunity. We've been locked out of our shul for months. And maybe that reminded us just how precious shul is in our lives. And I hope that the days of people coming to shul just for Kiddush, I hope those days are over. Because we've learned too much about the need for every single one of our tefillahs. How do we know that because of a Tehillim WhatsApp and the Tehillim being said by so many people in our community, that someone in our community wasn't saved because of what happened? And I can't leave out how this is an opportunity for us also to reassess our various relationships. For so many of us have learned new things about our own behavior, what we truly value, what annoys us about ourselves and those who we share our lives with. We need to continue to be honest with ourselves and grow in that respect. Not to run away and say, oh yeah, I'm just acting this way because we're all together for so long. No, let's be honest on Erev Yom Kippur. Let's look at our behavior and say, how could I improve? How could I be a more patient spouse, a more patient parent, a kinder person, a better friend? We need to plan. We need to take action. We have to answer the question of what is going to change about our lives for us. And here's a thought. What are we going to tell our grandchildren and our great-grandchildren, our family members that we will see a long time from now who have not yet even been born? What have we done differently as a result of living through this pandemic? Are we going to be like Noach? Or are we going to be like Moshe and the Kohen Gadol? I'd like to share with you something deeply personal. Along these lines of taking action, for my entire life, in looking back on some of the work that I've done personally, I've carried a sense of sadness with me. And over the course of a training that I had this past summer, I did some real work in trying to understand and touch that area that weighed me down with sadness. And listen to what I found. Picture the scene of a little boy looking at a grandfather staring out the window. And that grandfather had lost a wife and 5 children in the Holocaust. And somehow, some way, I accepted upon myself the sadness of my grandfather for years and years, and other sadness in my life just compounded and brought me to this place where people would look at me and they would see my sadness. And I finally touched it and I said, okay, but what do I do with this? And it was the sadness of knowing that there was a person in the world who was so unbelievably sad that they had lost 5 of their children. And I took that sadness upon myself and I said, I have to find a way just now, just this summer. And so I decided to take upon myself something I used to do in high school, but stopped for a long time. That every day, b'li neder, which is said at Torah's Nedarim, every day since the summer, I am mekabel upon myself that I say the 14 Shira Malos in memory of those children. And you know what? It has relieved a great deal of my sadness because I am able to feel as if I'm connecting to them. I am able to feel as if I am doing something to make a change. That somehow, some way, I am connecting and memorializing them in my life. And so we ask ourselves the question, what do we do to take something and act on it? We've lived through a pandemic. Please God, when we say the bracha of Shechiyanu tomorrow night, all of us will say, Shechiyanu v'kimanu v'giyanu lazman hazeh. We are here. Hashem has blessed us that we have lived through the pandemic, b'li ayin hara. What are we walking away with? Yoshua Neuwirth was a young man whose father was a rabbi in Germany. And they escaped before the war. And they managed to go to Holland. And in the spring of 1946, Rav Neuwirth, who was a young boy at the time, joined a group of illegal immigrants traveling to Eretz Yisrael. They were ordered to board a ship in Marseille, France on Shabbos. And he realized he had no choice. In order to live, he had to get on the ship on Shabbos. But on the other hand, it bothered him terribly that he violated Shabbos. So Rav Neuwirth decided that when he got to the land of Israel, he remembered the fact that he violated Shabbos and he said, I am going to make this up to Shabbos somehow. I can't let what happened be forgotten. And Rav Neuwirth, years later, wrote the masterpiece for our generation called the Shmira Shabbos Kehilchasa. He was the Talmud Muvak, the great student of Shlomo Zalman Auerbach, and he spent his years of his life focusing on a book that would make the laws of Shabbos palpable for everyone. Because he decided, I can't just go through an experience in life and forget about it. I have to move and take action. And so we ask ourselves the same question. We want COVID to be over, but to a certain degree, we want its impact upon us, causing us to change the way we look at ourselves to last. We can't afford to return back to normal. We need to live life in a new normal. And as we approach Yom Kippur, we ask ourselves the question, what is it that we can do? So maybe we start with just looking back at this year. And this is the story I was referring to before. And I've heard many different versions of the story, so forgive me. But the version that I heard was that there was a man in Italy, and you remember that the pandemic in Italy was terrible. At a certain point, people that were just dying left and right. And there was a man who survived and he made it home. And he started opening up the mail. And in the mail, he had a bill from the hospital. And he looked at the bill and he started to cry. And his family members came over to him and they said, don't worry, we'll help you pay. Why are you crying so incessantly? What's going on? And he said, I'm not worried about paying. He said, it's my honor to pay. So they said, well, why are you crying? And he said, I'm crying because for so many years, look at this bill. This bill was for me being on a ventilator that helped me breathe. And for so many years of my life, I've been breathing for free. I've been breathing God's air, and I haven't acknowledged it, and I haven't recognized it. And now I'm saying to myself, it's time. Look at this. Rabbi Aryeh Zev Ginsburg is a rabbi in Woodmere. He came down with a very, very bad case of COVID. So much so, and it was Erev Pesach, that his family was called by the doctors and told that he could pass at any moment. Now remember that time, you couldn't have any family members in the hospital. The only thing you were able to do was stand near a phone. Sometimes the nurses would be, the incredible nurses would hold up an iPad for the patients, put a phone to the side of the patient's ear, and so many people, their family was able to say vidu with them before they passed away just like that. They were never able to see them again. So Rabbi Ginsburg was on a ventilator, and the doctor called his family Erev Pesach and said, we don't think he's going to make it through the night. And his son-in-law was already speaking with the Chevra Kadisha in Israel because Rabbi Ginsburg wanted to be buried in Har HaZeisim next to his late daughter. And so they didn't know how they're going to sit down for a Pesach Seder. And Rabbi Ginsburg's wife said, listen, the Seder night is about Geula. Let's just hope for the best. So the son-in-law was in touch with the local Chevra Kadisha. If he passes away on Yontif, how do we get the body? We don't want him to go to the morgue. And miraculously, on Pesach, he took a turn for the better. And a number of weeks later, he was able to come home. And so he was quoted as follows. A little while after I was settled back home, my family began to fill me in on what had occurred. We really don't want to overwhelm you, they said, but we have to tell you something now before you hear it from others. They told me how I was in a coma for 30 days and that I was closer to the next world than to this one. They told me about the phone call on Erev Pesach from the doctor. They told me that the head of the Vad Chevra Kadisha was consulted to review what happens if there is a Petira on Yom Tov. They then shared with me all of the Tehillim and Tfilos that were said all over the world. They showed me 30 different WhatsApp groups created just for Tehillim. And then they shared that I now have a new name, Chaim. Finally, they told me about all the other people who had passed away. I felt completely overwhelmed. I felt like Choni Ame'agel, who woke up after 70 years to a new world. Was there still no school? Were people still out of work, seeing their parnasa crashing? And how could I even begin to digest just how many people we'd lost? The entire first night home, I couldn't sleep, struggling to understand why I was zocheh to this revealed miracle when so many others better and greater were not. It's been 6 weeks since I've returned home, and I simply don't have the words to properly express my hakaras hatov, my thanks not just for the miracle of my survival and the superhuman effort and dedication of my family during this period, but also for the condition in which I came home. The muscles in my body were not used for many weeks, resulting in extremely weak muscle tone. My right leg lost all its movement due to a hematoma that developed while I was lying immobile in the ward, which led to severe nerve damage. I've been in need of major rehabilitation. Baruch Hashem, I'm making steady progress. I'm now slowly learning to walk with a cane. I'm able to do steps well, and will hopefully, with hard work, Siyata Deshmaya, soon get back to where I was before. So he quotes that he spoke to his friend, who was a grandson of Rav Dessler, who told him that the Chafetz Chaim once said that when we make the bracha every morning of Hamechin Mitzadei Gaver, thanking Hashem for every step that we're able to take, he explained that when a person is born, Hashem allots that person a certain amount of steps in their lifetime. And when Hashem sees that the person is using up too many steps too quickly, He puts that person in the hospital or to bed to enable that person not to use up their steps. So what seems like a punishment is really a bracha for a longer life. And then he continues and tells the story that years earlier, he was really struggling with something, and he went to Rav Chaim Kanievsky and asked him, what should he do? And he told him, say 10 kapitel Tehillim every day. And he realized that the last kapitel Tehillim that he said on the day he went to the hospital had the words, Ritzei Hashem lahatzileni, Hashem lezrasi chusha, Hashem, be willing to save me. Hashem, hasten to my help. Little did I know, he says, how significant that pasuk would be for me in the days ahead. And then he said, a little while back, he started learning Mishnayos every day. And 2 weeks after he came home, his wife said to him, are you getting back into your new regimen, your old regimen? So he said, I haven't yet, but maybe it's time. And she said, Shavuos is coming. Torah, maybe you should start picking it up again. So he asked his wife to bring him his Mishnayos to find out where the bookmark was, because having been on a ventilator for 30 days, he didn't even remember what he did last. She gets him the Mishnayos, and she finds that it was in the Seder Nashim, his bookmark. And he had just finished the last Mishnah in the end of Masechet Sota the very morning he went into the hospital. And this is what he says, I was shaken to the core. The last Mishnah I learned ends with the words, Tchias HaMesim will come at the hands of Eliyahu Hanavi Zachur Latov. I merited to Tchias HaMesim, and it happened on the first day of Pesach, when we call upon Eliyahu Hanavi to join us, when we have a kos for Eliyahu at the table. Who knows if in the merit of learning that last Mishnah, I merited to this nace. And so he finishes by saying that every morning when he wakes up and says the words of Moda'ani, he thanks Hashem shechazarta bi nishmasi, that Hashem has given back his neshama, has given back his soul every single day. My friends, we sit here tonight and we ask ourselves the question, what mark will COVID-19, will this pandemic leave upon us? Will science just simply get us back to normal? Or will we create a new normal? A normal that is closer to HaKadosh Baruch Hu, a normal that recognizes just how precious our lives are. That the most simple thing as taking a breath, or smelling flowers, or speaking to a friend, or giving someone a hug, is something that we can never take for granted, and we can never allow ourselves to go a day without recognizing the hand of Hashem in our lives, because that's what we mean when we will say tomorrow night, Uvechein tein pachtecha Hashem Elokeinu. Let us all say, Hashem, we have received the message collectively for our brethren in the land of Israel, for the rest of our brethren all over the world, for our community in West Orange, for all of the cholim, for those who are ill from COVID and from other things. And for us as individuals, Ribono Shalom, we got the message, and I am going to make changes. I am going to do Shuva. During the Nisana Tokef, we say the words, V'chosam yad kol adam bo. That after 120 years, the Ribono Shalom presents us with a book. And he says, take a look at this book and read it well.
And when you're finished reading it, sign an autographed copy, because that's the book of your life. And in that sefer, I am confident that in that sefer there will be a chapter, and the chapter will be called Response to COVID-19. And here is the question that we must ask ourselves on this Erev Yom Kippurim. Will that chapter say that we were overwhelmed and descended like Noach? Or will the chapter say that we were courageous on a mission to preserve and build anew like Moshe? And that we were transformed and changed into a new person like the Kohen Gadol who exits the Holy of Holies on Yom Kippur? We don't yet know how this pandemic will be recorded in history. But we are the authors of our personal destiny. This moment of history is for us to record. Let us do ourselves true justice. Wishing the entire AABJ&D family a Gemar Chasima Tova, a meaningful and easy fast.